Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very good, Eve. I'm thrilled to be talking with you.
I'm so excited to see you and talk with you. And in the great Lawrence Lightfoot tradition, I have carefully prepared lots of questions. So we're going to get to as much as we can in the time that we have
Wonderful.
together. So for this conversation, we're going to talk a lot about inheritances. We're going to talk about some of the inheritances that you've received that have shaped who you are. And if we get to it, some of my inheritances from you. And the first thing I want to talk about is something you write and teach about a lot, which is the things we inherit from our family. You use this great phrase that I learned from you that I use all the time, which is the family curriculum. And your family curriculum is very unique and distinctive because your father, Charles Lawrence, was an eminent sociologist, and your mother, Margaret Lawrence, who just passed away at the end of 2019, was actually at the age of 105, was the
Yes,
first Black woman psychoanalyst in the United States. Could you
yes.
talk a little bit about your family inheritances and the way that they've shaped you, not just as a person, but as a scholar?
Well, I always really believe that the family curriculum, in whatever family you're in, is far more powerful than anything that we do in school in terms of its staying power, in terms
Right.
of the imprint on your journey. And my parents were academics, and my father, as you said, sociologist. But the other thing that they did was they were very, very involved in social justice and social action and civil rights and human rights and peace activism across the world. And that was very much a part of the curriculum as well. That is, that this combining of the academic and the activism. So I grew up believing that those things naturally blended together, that
Hmm.
particularly from my father, who was a sociologist, that social theory and social justice were part of the same conversation. Not that they were the same, but that we had to
Right.
recognize the connections between them. So I brought to my own work, and I've always brought to my own work, this sense of my scholarship being in the world and about the world, not only just observing and witnessing and documenting what's happening in the world, but having some feeling that I should be engaged in it, involved in it, and maybe have some level of impact on it. So in that small way, I mean, I could go on and talk for our whole time about that
Just
inheritance,
yeah,
but
right.
it's been very, very important to me. I think in terms of our conversation, we women, it was also very important that my mother was a very powerful worker in the world,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And that she brought this sense of service and activism, as well as this, medical history that she had as well, and that she was devoted really to families and communities of the poor, largely people in Black communities and brown communities in Harlem.
Do you think that that sense that activism and scholarship in the world are naturally in tandem? Do you see that as also well, this is a leading question. I know you do. Could you talk a little bit about how that's also part of a Du Boisian tradition? And I would really contend the entire history of Black scholarship in the United States, right? Could you just say a little bit more about that idea that those things go together?
Yeah, we've had this conversation before. I mean, Du Bois was my dad's teacher at Atlantic University. He was my father was his research assistant and worked alongside him and shared this kind of incredible eclecticism in work. So what did Du Bois do? He wasn't only the editor of Crisis, right, the NAACP magazine, but also he was an incredible sociologist, both quantitative and qualitative. He was a poet, right?
Yes, a novelist.
He was a novelist. It was just a broad, broad range of things that he did. And he did most of those things outside of the edges of the academy,
Right.
right? It was a time when we were not in the academy so much, although he got his PhD at Harvard. And so this notion of doing lots of things and blending lots of realms and seeing how important it is to express ourselves in various domains, whether it's science or whether it's art, whether it's spirituality, right? Or whether it's secularism, all of those things I think are at our, those are resources that we have for us that we can
Right.
blend together. And we can think of other, particularly Black scholars and artists who have shared this tradition of bridging these realms. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we're talking about inheritance with you here, is because you have done this in amazing ways
Oh,
in
thank
your own
you.
life and career. But you also came to Harvard with that, with that idea in mind and with those experiences in mind.
Well, it's one of the questions I get asked the most, like, how do you write this and also this? How do you do this and also this? And I'm always a little, I admit to being a little perplexed by the question. And I think that it's one of the things that the legacy of Black scholarship has to teach the rest of the academy. And one of the ways in which, another Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot ism that I repeat a lot is that when you are at the margins, you learn a lot because you can watch everything that's going on in the room. You watch what's happening at the center. And as you said, Du Bois and others like him have never had the luxury of, this kind of small-mindedness of just being in one thing. You say, I have to deploy all the tools at my disposal to do the urgent work. So
That's right.
I feel very, on a professional level, it really helps when you have an advisor that encourages you to do those things. And a
Right.
lot of people don't have that.
Yeah, and I do think I love this word urgent work, because what propels all of this forward, whether it was Du Bois or Charles Lawrence or Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot or Eve Ewing, what propels it forward is this sense of wanting to be deeply connected to this river of social justice, right?
Yes, yes.
Somehow this work needs to have implications, and it may not be immediate, and
Right,
people may not even see the connection other
right.
than you, but that really does motivate us, right?
Yes,
Gives us
absolutely.
energy, and whatever risks we might be taking by doing this in terms of whatever the academy's norms are and rules are, we're willing to take, because this is really what drives us forward.
Right. What's the alternative? Not going to not do
Right.
those things. Another thing in my own emerging career as a scholar, two words people comment on in my work that I also connect back to you are love and beauty. So I try to write with love, and I try to write things that are beautiful, with varying degrees of success, but I try. And I think that people think that those words are strange in an academic context or surprising or unorthodox. But I, again, always felt very empowered to write that way, partially because of your mentorship and your example. Could you talk about the themes
Because
of,
I insisted upon it,
yes,
right?
yes, it has to be beautiful.
It
Could you
has
talk
to be
about this?
beautiful.
Could you
Well,
talk
part of it
about love and
is,
beauty in your work?
yeah, part of it in terms of the beauty piece is that we are speaking to audiences beyond the academy.
Yes.
And in order to capture and catch their attention, we need to write well. We need to write beautifully so that people can feel drawn into the work, inspired by the work, and they can feel themselves part of it. So that writing isn't just to make it pretty; it's
Right.
really to communicate in a way. And academics, tend to write in a way that is very dry and very insular, often opaque,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and with certain kind of protocols that and habits that are followed. And I think in my work, and I know in yours, we've wanted to break that tradition.
Mm-hmm.
We've wanted to speak beyond the academy. Not that we don't hope that our work will be used in the academy by colleagues and by students. We do, but we're also speaking to a broader community who has different standards for how engaged they will become in the work. And we
Right.
are, and we want to produce beautiful work. I also believe, and this has come lately for me, that writing beautifully and with is always with precision, right? It's like poetry. You have to be precise.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be subtle. You have to be nuanced, and that's writing beautifully. And that also begins a level of analysis, I think, that is very, very important in the kind of work that we do, right?
Yes.
So that
Yes.
sometimes we discover in writing a beautiful sentence that this is a first level of analysis about what's going on, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that it isn't just, oh, portraiture is pretty writing at all. It's propelled by so much more.
Mm-hmm.
I think the love piece has to do with whose lives we're representing. And if through the work I'm representing people's lives. I have to, in some ways, it's driven by a love for this community and for these
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go back to Chicago, which is the place where you're going to do your work, right?
Right.
This is your community. And you write this beautiful, beautiful book about a community that you know well, and you want to represent them with love.
Mm-hmm.
You want to interview them, go out into the field and talk to them in a way that is cherishing, in a way that lets us know that they are worthy of this kind of documentation and all of that. So I think these words that are in our work, love and beauty, I really do wish that not everyone has to do this kind of work, but I wish that they were part of the lexicon and rhetoric of more academics.
Me too. And I think there's really an ethical valence to that. And I think that it's strange to me that many academics don't think of themselves as writers or don't call themselves writers, even though they write. I mean, we even have
Yeah.
the cliche of publish or perish, right? Most academics, their entire career is contingent upon this act of writing, but they don't think of themselves as writers. And I think that the point about love, and this is true also about social justice, the corollary is so troubling to me. So when I'm asked, why do you write with love, or why do you advocate for certain social positions, the counterfactual is actually really disturbing. And I think it's really worth asking, what does it mean to have scholarly traditions in which, if people are not approaching with love, what are they, what's their orientation? And that's very disturbing to me.
Yes. Well, I think there has been a tradition, certainly in social science, in academia, of social scientists focusing on, we've said this before many, many times, on pathology,
Yes.
weakness, and describing certain communities in those ways. And so that's been a preoccupation. The reason that people say they're preoccupied with that is because they want to make it better. These are problems that they want to rectify.
Right.
But in the end, that bleeds into a kind of blaming of the victim. They're poor. No wonder they're poor, the way they behave. And so I think that beginning with sort of saying, that's not where I begin in asking the question. I want to know what's good here, what's worthy here, what's strong here, what's resilient here, where the survival roots come from, and where the creative and expressive roots come from that produce this community and these people, right? And so I think it's true, related to this is asking this question about goodness, right?
Yes. Yes. That's why let's talk more about that. So, portraiture, which is the sociological method that is a hallmark of your career and your contribution to scholarship, is one of the basic tenets of portraiture, is this idea of the search for goodness. And I think it's actually a very simple and elegant idea that's also easy to misunderstand. And so could you talk a little bit more about what you mean in a research context when you say search for goodness? And also, what does it mean right now to challenge ourselves to search for goodness in a time when goodness is maybe a little bit more hidden than it usually is?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does not mean, maybe I should begin that way, it does not mean that you only talk about or observe those things which look healthy and strong and good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It does mean that you begin by asking the question, what is strong here? What is worthy here? What is resilient here? And it sounds like a trivial kind of shift of lens and frame, but it isn't, because as soon as you do that, you do see other kinds of things. I do believe, Eve, that if you begin that way, first of all, it allows you to talk about what's good, but it allows you as well to talk about what is prohibiting uh, of good, right?
Yes, yes,
Those
yes.
things which are barriers to people realizing goodness in their lives or in their communities or in their institutions. In other words, beginning with that question allows us to also entertain those things which were inevitably imperfection, right? These are human experiences, and we are imperfect, and so if we give a chance, if we give peace a chance, if we give goodness a chance, we also are able to then raise up those pieces that are not working, and even those pieces that are frankly evil. And we need to be able to call those out as well. And how are people responding to that evil might be where the goodness lies as well.
I think that that's so right. And I think that it also pushes us towards pathways for social transformation. And, as you said, part of the bargain and people's obsession with pathology, the bargain is supposed to be, if we do all of our work documenting the bad stuff, right, then something, right? The next step is always a little unclear. Someone's going to fix it. Someone's going to do something. People are going to be moved to action. And I think that that's important. But empirically, it hasn't seemed to work, right? Because people have been documenting the same things for a long time. And one of the things that I found very powerful about the pandemic is that if we search for goodness in this moment of great death and great loss and incomprehensible grieving, what we also see is people stepping up to provide for one another in the total absence and failures of the state. And I think that some of that political movement and mutual aid efforts and care effort that we see if we search for goodness gives us a blueprint for a different kind of life. It gives us a blueprint for a different kind of society. And I think that's very powerful. But I wouldn't see that if I weren't looking for it, because there's so much to be sad about right now.
Right. It also, that's beautifully put. It also is a moment, I think, for taking new perspectives on things, right? It's if we allow us to think about goodness, first of all, we have to step back from some of our judgmental kind of inclinations, that is, and really it's a chance to really look anew at what are our priorities, what are our habits, what are our values, what are our goals. I mean, it forces this kind of conversation. And I think only if we step back from being the sort of judges to being those people who are seeking to understand, not seeking to judge or even to measure, but seeking to listen and understand, then we will see these responses that are healthy and that are generative and generous.
Yes.
In a way that I think we might miss if we were only focused on the pathology.
Yeah, and it just doesn't cost us anything to just try and see, see where the line of inquiry takes us. We've spoken a little bit about the value of plain speaking as you see it, and the importance of speaking and writing in a way that is accessible to many audiences. And one of the ways in which I think you do that is through the use of stories. I think you are one of the best storytellers I know. And I'm really happy for you and your retirement and your next chapter. But one of the things I'm sad about is that so many students won't get to hear some of your great stories. So obviously, we don't have time to hear some of my favorites recounted, but I wonder if you could just tell us about what's one of your favorite stories that you like to tell students, and why do you tell it? What do you want them to take from it?
Well, what a great question.
It's my cheat, because really what I want to hear is I just want to hear a story, but we don't have time.
But in terms of speaking to wider audiences, this is a story that happened in Central Square. This was a story that is related to my book, Balm in Gilead, which is the about my mother, is the biography of my mother, and it's called Balm in Gilead, Journey of a Healer. And so my car, although it looks fancy, broke down. It was a Mercedes that kept on breaking down, very old one, about 14 years old. And so I was taking the bus from the South End bus into Harvard Square, which would pass through Central Square. I would get off at Central Square so that it would force me to walk a little bit to Harvard Square. And this morning that I got off of the bus, it stopped in front of a salon, a beauty salon, where people were getting their hair cut. And I stepped down the stairs, looked into the kind of front of the beauty parlor, and saw this woman, in a in a kind of a coat that they wear, that people who are working wear, and light blue coat. And she was banging on the window, obviously banging on the window. And I just kind of turned, I sort of wondered why. And I started walking up the street. And I heard this lady say, screaming out, a white woman, maybe 18 or 19 years old with frizzy hair, screaming out, stop that woman, stop that woman, stop that woman with the comb, right? She was me, and I sort of touched my comb. I guess she means me.
Yes.
I guess she means me. Now, she was screaming, but there was something about the screaming. It didn't scare me. So I just stopped in my tracks and I turned around, and she came right in front of me. And so she said, I'm so excited. I bet you don't know where I am. So I said, I don't know where you are. I'm in Central Square. Where are you? And she said, I'm in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I'm at the colored YMCA. And guess what? Charles and Margaret, they have just met. Margaret is looking down at Charles playing tennis, and she's just, I really do think she's just fallen in love. Well,
I love this story.
This young woman was in the midst of reading this book of mine. She works at a beauty parlor or a salon. Her fiance, with whom she's reading this book, right, is a trucker. And that Christmas, he had gone to the bookseller and said, give me something in a love story. And they had suggested Balm and Gilead. These people would never have known their lives, but whom they were deeply involved. And they were reading chapters to one another when he came home from his trips. And she was in Vicksburg. And guess what? Margaret and Charles were falling in love.
And here you are, the product of that love, right before her to see the
eyes. And why is this so important to me? Because this, to me, is my favorite audience story, that I had no idea in writing Balm and Gilead who this book would reach. But because it was written in the way it was written, and because it was full of story, right, and narrative, and because narratives allow us to see the universal in the particular, and to feel deeply implicated in the story ourselves. This could be me. I could be falling in love. Oh my God, look at his muscles, right? Of course she's falling in love. Of course she's falling in love. So there is this sort of sense of really being able to speak to this incredibly eclectic range of people through this work. And this gives me the greatest pleasure, so that's just one of the stories that I tell, just to really talk about how portraiture or this kind of narrative work can reach large audiences, but not only reach them, but move them. And make them feel a part of the story. Their story resonates, their love story resonates with Margaret and Charles' love story.
I love that story, and I cheated and got my way, which is that I got to hear that's a favorite story of mine. And I had someone who's had the great life-changing opportunity to study under you. I have lots of copious notes. I have scanned them. I have saved them. I've written down a lot of things you said, and I've learned a lot, and I've read a lot of articles and can explain Bronfenbrenner to people front and back. But I can retell your stories pretty well. And I think that says something about what we take away. And human beings really are always kind of telling the same few stories over and over again. And so that theme of finding the universal in the particular, to me, that's what ensures that the stories we're trying to tell to change the way people view the world, that those stories will live on for a long time. So I'm very inspired by that. And I remember the first time I heard that story, and I think ever since then, that's the kind of holy grail that I'm chasing as a writer.
And
Although
story, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I probably would have run away down the block and said, help me, or squared up and been ready to fight the person.
No, there was something in her, just excitement rather than terror. You know,
Right,
it
right.
really was and such an enthusiasm. But, you know, stories are not exclusive property. Stories
Right.
invite other stories, right?
That's right.
And they change over time as well.
Yes.
So that's another thing which I absolutely love about it.
And part of being a writer is the fact that all of us make meaning in the texts that have meant a lot to us. So I accept as a writer that the minute I put a book out into the world, it's gone on without me. It's
Right.
going to live its own life, and I will never understand or see or witness the vast majority of people who are going to encounter that book and make their own life with it. And in this particular moment, part of what's so stunning is that you got the rare opportunity to see it. But most of the time we don't see it, and you just accept that your
Yeah.
book is out there in the world doing its own thing, you know, without
And
you.
the other thing too, for young scholars is to recognize that when your book is out there and people don't like what you're saying, and it causes argument and critique and stuff like that, you have to recognize that if you're saying anything important, if you're saying anything kind of expressive and noteworthy, that people will argue with it. You know, people will not like it. So that
Right.
just like as a teacher, you don't stand up there to be loved,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because that's really absolutely will go south.
Yeah.
As a writer, too, you don't do it to be loved. You know, it's not, you know, so that if it engages people and they fume about it and rage about it and respond in that way, then you have to sort of be part of that conversation as well.
That's right. And you should be so lucky because most people write into obscurity. So
Exactly. Yeah.
um, I
You
have
should be so
one
lucky.
final question to ask you. I mean, I have 1,000 more questions, but I have
Yeah.
one final question for this conversation with eager anticipation for our next one. So
Yeah.
you've talked a little bit earlier about poetry, and I think another tool for plain speaking and for clear writing is a tool I also use in poetry, and that's the tool of metaphor. And you talk a lot in your teaching about the critical value of metaphor, about how metaphors bring clarity. And I think, you know, I think something I learned from you is that your piece of writing isn't really done until you understand the central metaphor that animates
Mhm.
it. So something I'm wondering about as you are in a new chapter, still new, still changing, a new chapter in your life, is there a metaphor that is guiding you right now, an image through which, a prism through which you're seeing yourself? What's the central metaphor in this chapter of your life?
Oh my goodness.
No pressure.
No, no. Well, I've been gathering. Um, I've been pulling together my life's work in preparation for it going to the Schlesinger Library, the Women's History Library. And that's taken a lot of time. And it's now, I don't know whether gathering is it or not, but it is, I would say it's a sobering process.
Hmm.
And the other thing that I'm thinking about, I'm not coming up with a metaphor well, but I want to tell you what I'm experiencing. And perhaps you can give it a metaphor.
Okay, we'll
What
see.
I'm experiencing, of course, is this is all of my lectures, it's all of my speeches, it's all of the data that fill my books, it's all of the interpretive kind of narratives that I've written about this. It's all of the stuff that leads towards publication, which you know is a plenty. So it's marketing and it's publicity and it's all of that. It's boxes and boxes and
Hmm.
boxes and boxes. I go through this very carefully and I've organized it in a way that really, you know, even before I'm putting it in boxes, I can look in the file cabinet and you can see my process. You know, you can sort of chart my process through it. So one of the things that so it's a gathering of all these things, and it's looking back in a way that I've never done before. So it's retrospective. And that's alarming, because for all my life, I've looked forward, what's next.
You always
And
sign off onward.
onward. Yeah.
Onward.
Carry on.
Carry on.
And so I look back, and it's sobering because for two reasons. I look back and there's young Sara, and she's working so hard. And I think, my gosh, girl, I wish I had been there for you and alongside you. This is such hard work, right? And the other thing I realize is that even though, if I think about my parents and the kind of barriers that stood in their way, institutional and interpersonal racism and of all kinds, you look back on these pages too, and you realize that still was there, that my journey was full of that as well. And it was full of overcoming that. And so much, how much of that energy and hard work was about moving forward in my journey against great odds, and part of the work that we've been talking about, and part of the inheritance that you're taking on and moving forward in your own way with your own signature and imprint so beautifully, that part of that is realizing how we, Black women scholars, can be not just reactive, but creative in the midst of moving forward. And if you want to it's a gathering, what I'm doing is gathering, but the recognition that in the midst of all this pushing beyond barriers and deciding what to respond to in terms of the various discriminations that were coming my way, that even with that, I was reserving the energy to be creative, right? To do my own thing. That wasn't being merely reactive. It was being me.
Yes.
Right? It was being me in all of my fullness. And I think that there's something about the gathering allowing for a recognition of that.
When you say the word gathering, the very first image that jumped into my head is you in a garden and with a big, beautiful basket, some basket that you got from some wonderful place and some incredible person on some magical travel, and something very flowing and beautiful and comfortable, and the sun is shining. And I see you moving through rows of herbs and flowers and thinking, what am I going to make? And what do I have? What's in the kitchen? What's in the freezer? Who's coming over? What do they like? But oh, I have this mint that I didn't expect, or oh, I have this thyme that I forgot has gone wild, and really bringing these things together to create something. So I'm very excited to be a witness to the gathering.
That's a wonderful picture. I hope I can live into it.
Yes, I hope also that you can have a dinner party soon.
Oh, I know. The other thing I think is that with this overlay of the pandemic, and all of that, it's sort of obviously distorted so much of all of our energies, and optimism.
Well, Professor Sara Lawrence Lightfoot, one of my greatest influences, mentors, teachers, role models, North Stars of my life. I really believe, speaking of gathering in gardens, I really believe in giving people their flowers when you get the chance. And I always am grateful for the chance to give you all the literal and metaphorical flowers in the world. So thank you for having this conversation with me today. And thank you for letting us be witness to your work.
And thank you for asking those beautiful questions and for being an extraordinary inheritor of all of this and making something, not only receiving it and understanding it, but giving it your own shape.
Thank you.
Own imprint, moving forward in the most beautiful, soulful, creative, really incredibly generous way.
Thank you. Thank you
So
so
there,
much.
here we are, a mutual admiration society.
Oh, yeah, I'll take it. I'll take what I can get. Thank you.
Okay, take good care.
You do the same.
Okay, carry on.
Carry on.
Carry on. Right.